We are going to continue the series that we started about acceptance or accepted. And I'm just going to put the disclaimer out here before I get started. I'm probably going to get in a little bit of trouble, but I think a little bit is okay. So, how many of you? Well, I'll tell on myself first. Uh, I'm a coffee drinker. I know some of you are, some of you aren't. And one of the things that I don't care for syrups or sugars or anything like that. I say if the coffee's good, the taste of the coffee is good. But I do like cream. I do like half and half. And I've gotten to where I think it's a reasonable amount. Again, if the coffee's good enough, I don't need as much, right? But when I first started drinking coffee, my wife would say, "Do you want a little coffee with your cream?" Like it was just a little excessive. We'd buy a quart of half and half and it would be gone like in an unreasonable amount of time since I'm the only one in the house who uses it. Right. Another one, maybe some of you can relate to. How many of you like whipped cream on your pie at Thanksgiving? Well, this is the one where I'm going to get in a little bit of trouble because my wife we call her the whip queen because that's what, when she was little, she called it whip. And that's her thing. I'm not sure which she likes better, the whipped cream or the pie, but I'll just say the ratio is greater than 50-50, okay? You might say that it's excessive or extravagant. And I'm not saying any of those statements to be judgmental, but what we're going to talk about today, a passage that might be familiar to you, it's often referred to as the story of the prodigal son, or in the New Living, it says the lost son. We're going to look at this story from a different angle. We've called today the prodigal father. Because the reality is, these parables, which we find peppered throughout the New Testament and Jesus' teaching, these are not just metaphors about what Christians should do or be. This parable that we're going to look at today, and you can go ahead and open to Luke 15, that's where we're going to be. There's several of these parables right in a row. This parable is not a metaphor, it's actually a statement about God our Father. The point that Jesus is making when he tells his stories, he's trying to reveal to the listeners who the Father is. And I'll be honest, I heard this story growing up, and I didn't even necessarily have a good working definition of the word prodigal. I heard this story, and the focus is typically on the son who runs away and spins everything and does all these foolish things. And so in my mind, I thought, well, that, as a kid, like that's probably what prodigal means. The kid that runs away and does something stupid. And I'll be honest, maybe there's been times I've related to that, right? I may have done some things in my life that felt that way. Well, if you go to Oxford Dictionary, which I think is a reliable source, prodigal is defined as spending freely and recklessly, being wastefully extravagant, or giving on a lavish scale. And I appreciated the example that they put here. They use it in a sentence. It said the dessert was crunchy with brown sugar and prodigal with whipped cream. Right? The focus of this is actually now. Yes, did the son do prodigal acts when he went and blew all the money and partied his inheritance away? Yes. But the thing that we don't connect is that the acts of the father were also prodigal acts. His welcome, his party, his celebration for a son that was lost and has now been returned, these were prodigal acts. They were extravagant. They were lavish. All right? I want to go ahead and make this statement, and then we're going to read portions of this story, and then I'll summarize some of it because it's a pretty big chunk. One of the first things that we're going to see in this parable is that God is an accepting father of both sons. And we'll talk in a little bit about maybe some of what the two sons represent. But the point that Jesus is illustrating is that God is a God of acceptance. That's what we've been talking about in this series, right? All right, so let's jump in. This is Luke 15. I'm going to start in verse 11. And so Jesus has just told the parable of the lost sheep and the parable of the lost coin, right? And so that's where we find here in Luke's writings. And so in verse 11, he says, to illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. Now, do you realize again, this reiterates what I was saying? Jesus is telling these parables. He has one main point in all of them to reveal the Father, to tell us what God is and what he is like. So Jesus told them this story. A man had two sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land, and there he wasted all of his money in wild living. That's the first chunk, right? First of all, I just want to point out, you might not think we're to the part of the Father being accepting. Culturally, the fact that the Father even agreed is already like outside of the norm, right? Like this is, the Father was accepting of the Son. He agreed to his request. And I'm putting the asterisk here. This is my assumption, opinion, interpretation, whatever you want to call it. This is not, okay? He probably had enough of a track record that the dad probably knew he might not be the most trustworthy, but he's my son. I love him. I accept him, and I'm going to give him what he's asked for. Okay? So I'm not going to read this whole next chunk, but basically it expounds on what he goes and parties all the inheritance away. And at one point he comes to a realization, because there's a famine that sweeps over the land. Like all of a sudden food is scarce, and what was once plentiful in his resources was now diminished. And he basically says, gosh darn it, the servants at home actually are better than where I've ended up. I'm going to go back and I'm going to basically grovel before dad. I'm going to say, I've sinned against you. I goofed up. I made a mistake. Will you take me back? And so we drop down to verse 20, and it says, he returned home to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming, and filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son. Now, I have to be honest. When my kids do something not smart, I'm not always filled with love and compassion, right? I have to believe that this father had just allowed the Spirit to mold him and shape him into somebody that looked more like our Father. Because it said, filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, he embraced him, and he kissed him. And the story goes on to say, he basically tells everybody, we're going to have a big party. My son who was dead is alive. He was lost. Now he's found, and we are going to celebrate. And we begin to see this definition of prodigal. He says, there's a calf that we've been fattening up, saving for a special occasion. Get the best robes and get my boy dressed like he is part of this family. Call all the people, gather everybody in. We are going to celebrate. We're going to party. Well, we said this story has two sons, right? And the father, I almost missed this. The father also gives the son who has run away and come back his ring. This is significant because this says you are part of the family. That's what this signifies. You are included. You are part of us. I also found this interesting. He makes sure he puts shoes on. Now, to us, you're like, well, everybody has a pair of shoes. In this culture, that was not so. Shoes were like a status thing. And this family, it's like, again, this is a statement of acceptance, of inclusion. And these are outward or open symbols, right? So just go with me here for a minute. The father loves his son. He accepts him. He doesn't have to go all the way to being so open and public. Like he could say, "Come here to the side, son. I know you goofed up. I'm glad you're back. I still love you, but we're going to keep this kind of hush hush because you did mess up pretty bad." Does that sound like something maybe we could hear in our day and time? But he doesn't do that. He goes not only to the level of extravagance, but he does it openly. He does it, you might almost say flashy. Like he does all the things to show visibly everybody. And he openly accepts the sin. Now, this would have been talked about. I'm just trying to paint a picture here. This level of valuing and extravagance and things like it would. How many of you don't have to raise your hand, but how many of you are from a small town? Small enough that you know what it means. If something happens in one of the families in town, everybody knows about it. And if it's a little outside of the norm, they might talk about it, perhaps judgingly, perhaps a little bit of gossip, because that's not how we do things around here. That's not how things are done, right? This is that kind of situation. Everything the Father is doing is so far outside of the norm, everybody was going to be talking about it. It didn't compute. Nobody else was saying, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense. That's what I would do." No, they're all thinking, "No, this kid messed up. Are you just going to reward this foolish behavior? What are you saying to all of the other kids?" These are the things we start to hear, right? This was most uncommon. Like, beyond probably what I can describe. Not only was it uncommon, it was wasteful. It was unwise and it was unexpected. Like you hear that even in the son before he comes back, he sort of gives himself a pep talk. And he says, "Okay, I'm gonna, eat my shoe, and I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna say, Dad, I'm sorry. I've sinned. Can you at least just like let me sleep in the barn?" I mean paraphrasing there, but like his attitude was, can I just get back in at the lowest level? Even the son was not expecting this type of act to take place. All right. Now we're going to shift our focus to the other son. Because what happens is the preparations begin happening, and this is like a multi-day event, right? It's not like from 3 to 6. It's like from Tuesday to whenever, right? All of this starts happening. The party starts popping off. Things are coming together. Things are maybe getting a little rowdy because I just sounds like these people know how to throw a party. Because the older son, his attention gets caught and he asks one of the servants, what's going on? Like, why is this, And the servant says, "Oh, don't you know? Like your brother who was lost, he's back, and we're celebrating. This is a big deal." Well, the older son, I'm not going to say that any of us have ever been there, but he's a little irritated by this. Probably some of those same statements are going through his mind. What do you mean? Like, Dad is rewarding this foolish choice? Like, that's not how he raised us. That's not what we were taught. And he sort of marches up to his dad and he's going to give him a piece of his mind. And he says, this kid wasted what you gave him. And I have never left your side. I've been the good son. I've done all the right things. I've kept the rules. I haven't goofed up. Where's my celebration? When did you kill the fatted calf for me? You didn't even give me a goat, right? And his father, this is in verse 31, his father said to him, "Look, son, you have always stayed by me. Everything I have is yours." The father is also accepting of the son who's acting more like a Pharisee, a legalist, right? True, he didn't go do the things the other kid did, but he had a different problem. The father accepts him, and he says in verse 32, "We had to celebrate this happy day. Your brother was dead. He was written off, gone, done, not to be heard from. And now he has come back to life. He was lost, and now he is found." Now, I don't know that we read, but let me back up and say it this way. Of what we read, we don't see this older son accepting the father's acceptance. The father comes to him and offers him the same loving acceptance that he offered the younger son. We don't necessarily see him accepting it, but the picture of the father is the same. Whether you have gone out and forsaken everything and sowed wild oats to the point that you're in squalor, or if you have just been a little too concerned about all of the rules that you've lost your first love, Jesus says the Father accepts you. He welcomes you. He embraces you. And he does it openly. The picture of Father God sending Jesus to endure what he endured to pay the price on the cross is a very public event. It's very open. And it's that same picture. He's doing that to openly show how he values you, how he accepts you, and how he welcomes you in. I want to look at one more story. We're not going to read it. I'm just going to put the reference up. But in Mark 14, we see a great picture of another prodigal act of openly and publicly valuing to the extreme. This is where Mary anoints Jesus with the oil from her alabaster box and uses her hair, right? As an act of worship. And it causes the same stir. They're like the religious elite are like indignant. Like what do you mean? Like you could have sold that and got like a year's wage. That's too expensive. That's too wasteful. That's too extravagant. And Jesus rebukes them and says, she has done a good thing for me. She has poured out worship. She has poured out and openly valued and expressed a relationship that she has. You see, we see in these stories, and I could maybe tell some current stories, but I probably don't have to convince you, acceptance is not common. Acceptance is uncommon. It's not the norm. Now, if you want to go back and pick up last week, I'd encourage you to watch the teaching where we talked about the difference between acceptance and approval, because everybody's looking for approval. And we often want to base our acceptance on whether or not we approve. Well, I'll accept you as long as I approve of what you're doing. I'll accept you as long as what you're doing doesn't make me uncomfortable. As long as you think the same, look the same, act the same, fit the box, and don't break out too much, I'll accept you. Jesus has radical, uncommon acceptance. And yet, that doesn't mean he approves of everything, right? This is not a universalist message that says that we throw everything out and it's all sunshine and rainbows and nothing matters and you can do whatever you want and we're all going to the same place. No, and that's a different message. I'm not going there, but acceptance is uncommon. And this acceptance of our Father is prodigal acceptance. And that's not based on what we have done. That's based on the way that he shows his acceptance, the way that he values us as his kids. It's rife with prodigal acts. He lavishes upon us his loving acceptance. He goes to great lengths to show us our value. Now, I struggle with this. Maybe you do too. I have a way easier time valuing other people than valuing me, right? And I know even that can go to extreme. I'm not talking about becoming puffed up and arrogant and I'm the best thing since sliced bread, but I have to reconcile how I feel about myself with what God says about me. And if there's a discrepancy between those two, my default needs to be what God says is true, even if I don't feel that way. And this is coupled with humility. I'm not saying throw humility out the window. I don't need to go around announcing how great I am. I'll be honest, I still don't really feel that way. But the truth of the matter is, God says to each and every one of us, I love you. I accept you. Like you're our pastor in Champaign Happy used to say, I want everybody to know, by the way, he told me I'm his favorite, but so are you. Like, think about that. Like, he's not actually playing favorites, but the way that a parent would relate to their favorite kid, and I know we're not supposed to have favorites, you know, I won't go there. The way that that looks, God does that. He relates to you as if you're the favorite, as if you're the only. Like he loves you and accepts you to that degree. Our God, he is an accepting God. These parables, these illustrations, these stories show us that our God is an accepting Father. And we, as a community of people, we want to be accepting like our Father. We want to be those kind of people. We want to practice radical welcome and acceptance. And we also want to be people that, unlike the older son, we accept our Father's acceptance for ourselves. See, it's really easy. And again, I'll just speak for me. It's really easy for me to have a moment of feeling that God is coming towards me with his acceptance, and I sort of stop and put up a barrier and say, yeah, but God, I'm not there yet. You know, I'm not as good as you say I am. I've done this and I've done that, and I'm just, I'm learning and I'm growing, but I'm not there yet, right? Like we start to make excuses. And the reality is we need to open our hands. We need to open our hearts. And I know for me, that can be one of the most uncomfortable things, to accept that what God says about me is true, whether I feel it or not. I really want to believe my feelings. We have a saying in our house, feelings can be really good liars and manipulators. Now, they're not all wrong. I'm not anti feeling. Feelings can be totally valid. But they can also be manipulated. They can also be untrue. And so I have to use the reliable plumb line or measure of what Jesus says about me if I'm going to compare to anything, right? So we want to be more accepting like our Father, and we want to be more accepting of our Father. And that means being open, being vulnerable, allowing him to change us. You see, this is, I don't know, for me, this is a hard statement. Accepting God's acceptance is more important than accepting what he does. I can usually accept what he does because he does a lot of good things. And I can say, thank you, God. Thank you for the ways you've helped. Thank you for the people you've put in my life that bless me. Thank you for the weather being above freezing. Like, I can go on and on. I'm thankful. But maybe that's not as important as accepting God. I, I accept that you accept me as I am. Because the reality is that acceptance is a part of letting go. And only when I let go can that acceptance fully come and begin to change me, begin to mold me and shape me and transform me. Again, just like we said last week, I don't have the power to change me, to make me different, to make me look like Jesus. I have to accept the love and acceptance of my Father. And then in that position of open, yielded surrender, I say, God, I trust you. I'm giving you permission to change, adjust, or mess up whatever you find in me that doesn't please you. That's a scary statement. But if I dig down in my heart, that's my cry. Whatever doesn't please you, God, change it. Because I know you made me to be like you. I know you made me to be fully acceptable, to be fully holy, to be uncommon. That's my call to us today as I wrap this up. Let's be an uncommon people.